Welcome back to the deep dive. I want to start today with a question that sounds a little bit metaphysical, but I promise we are going to get very practical very fast.
Okay, I'm ready.
When you put on a pair of headphones, noise canceling on, world off, and you press play on your favorite electronic track, where are you?
Geographically. You're on the train. You're at your desk.
Right.
You might be doing the dishes.
Physically, yes. But mentally, you enter a space that has its own rules, its own, gravity, and most importantly, its own flow of time.
I see where you're going with this.
Today, we are going to look at the people who build that space. And we aren't talking about musicians in the traditional sense. We are talking about architects.
That is a crucial distinction right out of the gate.
Yeah.
We are unpacking just a fascinating column today from Monumental Movement Records, MMR, and it's simply titled Rhythm Programming Design Theory.
And if that sounds dry or academic?
Let me assure you, it is the exact opposite. This is a look under the hood of how your brain processes reality when music is playing.
It completely flips the script on how we think about making beats. I think the average person, they picture a drummer, someone sweating, hitting things with sticks, capturing a moment of passion.
Right, it's visceral.
It is. That's performance. That is sort of the old world. And don't get me wrong, performance is beautiful, it's reactive, you are riding the wave of time as it happens.
Sure, you're in the moment.
But this source material is arguing for a different philosophy entirely. It's about programming. And programming is not just a digital version of drumming.
No, not at all. And that's a common misconception. The source makes this point so clearly that programming isn't just typing in notes. It's a fundamental shift in perspective.
A shift in your relationship with time itself.
Think of it like this. A drummer is inside the stream of time, swimming with the current. They have to react to the moment immediately before it.
Right.
A programmer steps out of the stream. They're standing on the riverbank, or, even better, hovering above it in a helicopter.
Oh, I like that.
They have what the source calls a bird's eye view of time. They can see the beginning, the middle, and the end of the track all at once.
It's God mode. You aren't living through the 3 minutes of the song. You are looking at the 3 minutes as a single object that you can manipulate.
It really is. You aren't reacting to time, you are designing it. You are placing events on a timeline, specifically to manipulate how the listener, you, with the headphones on, perceives the passage of those 3 minutes.
So our mission today is to turn everyone listening into an audio architect. We are going to deconstruct the blueprint. We're going to talk about grids, the physics of silence, psychoacoustics, and why a computer can, in some cases, sound more human than a human if you program it right.
It's a bold claim, but the math backs it up. We are going to explore how producers manipulate our perception of reality using these very tools, turning listeners into, like you said, audio architects for the next hour or so.
So let's start with the foundation. If we are building a house, we need a site plan. In the world of rhythm design, the source calls this the coordinate system.
The grid. Specifically, the 16-step grid.
Okay, for the non-producers listening, paint this picture for us. What are we looking at? Because when I hear grid, I think of, Excel spreadsheet.
And honestly,
Yeah.
you aren't that far off. Visualize a single measure of music. In standard 44 time, that's your 1, 2, 3, 4.
Right.
Now imagine taking that block of time and slicing it into 16 equal pieces, like a ruler with 16 little hash marks on it.
So 4 little boxes for every single beat. You're 1 in it, 2 in it.
Exactly.
Okay.
In the software, this literally looks like a grid. It looks like a spreadsheet. And the source argues that this isn't just a helper tool. It is the environment. It is the laws of physics for that track.
Wow.
When you program rhythm, you aren't just playing a sound. You are populating a specific coordinate on this map.
So it's not about feeling the beat yet. It's about placing a dot on a graph.
Precisely. And typically, there is a standard skeleton that almost all modern music hangs on. If you walked into a club anywhere in the world, you'd hear this skeleton. It's almost universal.
The basic anatomy. Okay, so you have your kick drum, that low thud, that usually goes on step 1 and step 9 if we're counting 1 through 16.
Or beats 1 and 3, yeah.
That's your heartbeat. Thump, thump.
The downbeats. That anchors you to the floor. It's what you feel in your chest.
And then to create that back and forth motion, you have the snare drum, the sharp crack on steps 5 and 13.
Beats 2 and 4.
Exactly. Kick on the downbeat, snare on the backbeat.
Hoof bap, hoof bap.
That's the one. It creates a box. It provides stability. It's something your brain can immediately latch onto.
But the source points out something absolutely critical here. That skeleton is just the foundation. It is the concrete slab. And by itself, it's static. If you just program that in at full volume, it doesn't move. It's just there.
It sounds robotic
Yeah.
and not in a cool Kraftwerk way. It sounds like a metronome.
Lifeless.
Utterly lifeless.
So how do we make it move? This is where the source gets into what it calls accent theory. And this was a huge aha moment for me. It's all about designing forward motion. This is where we leave the realm of pure math and enter the realm of physics, or at least the illusion of physics. The source discusses the concept of velocity, which is really just, volume intensity.
How hard you're hitting the drum.
Exactly. If every hit is the same volume, the beat feels flat.
Like a wall. Just brick, 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 brick.
Yeah.
No contour.
Yes. But let's look at what the article calls case study A, fixed strength. That's your wall. Beats 1 and 3 are max volume. It feels rigid, unyielding.
Okay.
Now, compare that to case study B. This is what the source calls the rolling effect. And this is how you make a flat grid feel like it's rolling down a hill.
Okay, walk us through it. This is fascinating.
Imagine those two kick drums we mentioned.
Yeah.
The one at the start of the bar on beat 1 and the one in the middle on beat 3.
Right.
If you make the first kick the strongest, maximum impact, full velocity, and then you make that second kick, the one on beat 3, just slightly weaker, maybe 10–15% quieter.
It creates a slope.
It creates a slope. Your ear hears that heavy initial impact, and then the lighter hit feels like it's tumbling away from the first one. It makes the entire second half of the bar feel lighter, almost aerodynamic.
So it creates the sensation that the loop is physically rolling forward into the next bar.
That's it exactly. It's a psychological trick. You're using volume to imply motion and gravity.
That is so cool. So the 16-step grid is just the draft. It's the pencil sketch. The real design is in how hard you press down on the pencil for each dot.
Exactly. You are sculpting the intensity to guide the listener's ear through time. If everything is loud, nothing is urgent. If you vary the strength, you create gravity. You are essentially creating a topographic map of sound where the listener just naturally slides from one beat to the next.
Okay, so we have our grid, our coordinate system, and we have our gravity, our accents. But if we stay perfectly on that grid, even with the volume changes, it's perfect. And the source argues that perfection is actually a problem.
The problem with perfection is that it is fundamentally unnatural. In the physical world, nothing repeats exactly the same way twice. Not your heartbeat, not your footsteps, nothing.
True.
If you stick 100% to the grid, the time is fixed. It's rigid. The source argues that to make a beat feel alive, to give it that elusive human feel, you have to design imperfection.
And this isn't just about being sloppy, right? This isn't just random. The source calls it intentional zur.
Zur is a great term for it. It's a Japanese word that implies a lag or a shift, a deviation. And the key here, the absolute key, is that this human feel in programming is a calculated design choice.
It's not an accident.
It is not randomness.
No.
It is specific targeted manipulation. You aren't just missing the beat, you're missing it on purpose by a precise amount every single time.
Let's talk about the specific techniques mentioned, because I think people feel these all the time without even realizing what's happening. The first one is the dragged snare.
Or the layback. This is a classic, specifically in genres like hip-hop and neo-soul, though the source treats it as a universal design principle.
So what's the technique?
The technique is simple. You take that snare hit, the one on beat 2 or beat 4, and you delay it. We are talking milliseconds. Just a tiny, tiny nudge to the right on the timeline.
So it hits just after the grid line.
Just barely.
Yeah.
Maybe 20 to 50 milliseconds late. It's a tiny amount of time, but the psychoacoustic effect is massive.
What does it do to you as a listener?
It feels like the rhythm is being pulled backward. It's heavy. The source says it mimics the physical motion of a drummer who is really relaxed, maybe raising their arm high and letting gravity bring the stick down so it hits just a split second late.
It gives it weight. It feels heavy, lazy, but in a good way, like it's confident.
Exactly. It's the layback. It tells the listener, hey, we're in no rush here, just chill. It creates a sense of cool, of confidence. But then compare that to the opposite technique, the pushed hi-hat.
This is the anxiety inducer.
Or excitement. Depends on the context.
Yeah.
Here, you take the hi-hats, those fast ticking sounds, usually on the 8th or 16th notes, and you nudge the offbeats slightly early.
Before the grid line.
Before the grid line. So they are rushing. They are jumping the gun.
Then what does that do?
When you combine a rushing hi-hat with a steady on-the-grid kick, it creates this incredible sense of urgency. It's front-loading the rhythm. You feel like you're literally leaning forward in your chair.
It's like the music is pulling you along, begging you to catch up.
It is. But here is the golden rule that the source emphasizes. And this is what separates the amateurs from the masters.
What's that?
You must not move all the sounds by the same amount.
Right, because if you move everything late, the whole track is just late. There's no tension.
Exactly. Then it's just a late track.
Yeah.
The groove, the magic, the pocket comes from the friction between the elements. You need the kick to be dead on the grid to act as the anchor so that the snare can drag against it.
So the groove lives in the space between the perfect and the imperfect.
It is the distance between the perfect grid and the imperfect sound that creates the feel.
That friction concept is fascinating. It's like the groove lives in the mistake, or the designed mistake.
It's the tension between expectation and reality. Your brain expects the hit on the grid line. When it arrives a few milliseconds late, that micro moment of waiting and then resolution creates a physical release of tension.
And that release is what makes you nod your head.
That's what makes you nod your head. You are physically reacting to the resolution of that microtension over and over again.
So we have the grid, we have the human error. Now let's talk about quantity, because I think when people start making beats, the tendency is just to fill every single square on that grid. I have 16 slots, I better use them all.
It is the fear of silence, horror vacui. But the source brings up a critical concept here. Density as information. It treats note density as cognitive load.
Cognitive load. So every time a sound plays, my brain has to do work. It has to process that event.
Exactly. Every note is a piece of data. If you have too many notes, you are flooding the listener's buffer.
Yeah.
They can't process it all, and it just becomes noise. The source says it beautifully. Rhythm is defined by the sounds you don't play.
This is the art of subtraction.
It really is. Think about a dense wall of text versus a well-formatted poem. The poem has impact because of the white space around the words.
It's a great analogy.
The source uses the breathing technique as an example. Imagine a hi-hat pattern that plays on every single one of the 16 steps. It's a continuous rattle. Tick, 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 tick.
It's exhausting. It's like someone talking at you without ever taking a breath.
It is. It's just a wall of sound.
Oh, yeah.
But if you apply this breathing technique, you simply remove, say, every fourth note. Tick, 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 tick.
Ah.
Suddenly, the rhythm gains a breath. It has a gap, a pause. It stops being a monologue and becomes a conversation.
And it creates a pattern. Our brains love pattern recognition. We latch on to that gap, that silence, as much as we latch onto the sounds.
And you can use that subtraction to trick the brain. This is where the source talks about creating pseudo-polyrhythms.
Wait, unpack that for me. Polyrhythm usually means playing two different time signatures at once, right? Like a 3 count over a 4 count. That sounds really complicated to program.
It can be. But the source argues you don't need complex time signatures to achieve the effect. You can do it just by deleting things or, as we talked about, accenting things.
How does that work?
If you have a standard 4/4 loop, but you accent every third note, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, your ear starts to hear a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 cycle happening inside the 1, 2, 3, 4 container.
So you are creating a phantom loop inside the real loop.
Yes, and your brain tries to follow both at once. You're making the listener perceive multiple cycles happening simultaneously, even though it's just one simple loop. It creates this incredible depth and complexity from very simple materials.
It's an audio illusion.
It is architecture. You are building structures that only exist in the mind of the listener. You are making them hear a melody in the drums that isn't technically written there.
Speaking of structures, let's zoom out. We've been looking at the micro level, the individual hits, and the spaces between them. But the source moves on to structure and loops, and specifically, the psychology of repetition.
This is absolutely essential for electronic music. The loop is the fundamental building block. But there is a paradox, which the source identifies.
A paradox of loops.
A perfect loop, if repeated enough times, eventually causes time suspension.
I've felt this. You're listening to a techno track, and after a while you stop hearing the loop. It just becomes background noise, wallpaper.
Your brain filters it out. It's a process called sensory adaptation. Your brain says, I've learned this pattern, I know it's coming, I don't need to waste energy paying attention anymore.
So the designer's goal is to fight that. How?
The goal is to create change that moves time forward without being noticed.
Subliminal change. That's a tricky balance.
It is. The source suggests micro changes on a 1-bar scale. For example, at the very end of a bar, you remove the very last 16th note hi-hat.
Just one tiny note.
Well,
Out of 16?
Just one. Or you add a ghost note, a very, very quiet snare hit at the end of the bar. What this does is it acts as a tiny signal to the subconscious. It says, the cycle is ending, get ready for the restart. It keeps the brain engaged without shaking it awake.
It's like a bookmark. It tells your subconscious where you are in the story so you don't get lost.
Exactly. And then you have changes on the macro structure, the 4-bar scale. Maybe a little snare roll or a cymbal crash, only on the 4th measure.
Okay, that's more noticeable.
It is. It acts as a structural punctuation mark.
Okay.
It says, end of paragraph. A new paragraph is starting now. It helps the listener build a mental map of the song's larger structure.
But then the source gets into psychological time, which is where things get really trippy. It talks about blurring the end of the loop.
This is a technique to make a loop feel infinite. If you have a strong crash cymbal or a loud, definitive hit at the very end of the loop, you are emphasizing the boundary. You're saying, here is the wall, the end. But if you weaken that final note or remove it entirely, maybe add some reverb or delay so it just fades away,
Okay.
the boundary disappears.
The loop just dissolves into the next story.
It creates a seamless circle. The listener loses track of how many times it is repeated. It's a classic technique for inducing a trance state in the listener.
And what about the outside accent?
This is another way to warp time. You place a loud, unexpected accent outside the expected cycle.
Like hitting a crash cymbal on beat 2 instead of the downbeat of beat 1.
Or even on an offbeat, a place that feels unresolved. It stretches the listener's sense of time duration. It makes a 4-beat measure feel longer because the brain is waiting for the resolution that now comes later than expected.
You are literally warping the listener's perception of how long a minute is.
That's the power of it. Rhythm is not just sound, it is the manipulation of your psychological clock. You can make a 3-minute song feel like 10 minutes of blissful infinity, or make 10 minutes feel like a frantic 2-minute sprint.
Okay, that's wild. I want to talk about the sounds themselves now, because usually we think of rhythm as when the note is played, and melody is what note is played. But the source argues that timbre, the character of the sound, is actually part of the rhythm structure.
Timbre equals time. That is the argument, and it's a powerful one. Sound selection isn't just decoration, it dictates rhythm.
How so? Give me an example.
Think about the duration, the envelope of a sound. Let's contrast a tight, short kick drum with a long, sustained sub-bass.
Okay.
A short kick is a point in time. It's a dot. Thud. It's over almost as soon as it begins. It marks a specific coordinate on the grid.
Right. It's momentary, punctual.
But a long sub-bass, whoop, that isn't a point. It's a line. It has a tail. It has decay. It fills the space between the beats.
So by choosing a long sound versus a short sound, you are effectively designing the silence or the lack.
Exactly. The contrast creates 3D space in the mix. The short kick gives you the beat, the initial impact, and the long bass gives you the afterfeel, the tail. The source says this separates the impact from the atmosphere.
And if you only use short sounds,
The track feels staccato, dry, maybe a bit nervous. If you only use long sounds, it's just a muddy, undefined wash of sound. You need the contrast to define the space and the rhythm.
and what about frequency? Low sounds versus high sounds.
This connects back to our biology, really. Low frequencies-based kick drums carry a lot of physical energy. They feel heavy. So in design theory, they anchor the time, they fix the grid. They are the heavy pillars holding up the structure.
And the high frequencies, the hi-hats, the shakers, the cymbals.
They are light, they are fast, they don't have that same physical weight, so they indicate the flow. They show the movement on top of that foundation.
So the bass is the map, and the hi-hats are the car moving across it.
That's a great analogy. And the expert warning in the source is crucial here. If you break this balance, for example, if you have a flighty low end, a bass that is jumping all over the place without a solid kick drum anchoring it, the whole rhythm feels unstable.
Right, ungrounded.
It makes people anxious because the floor feels like it's moving beneath them.
Unless, of course, that anxiety is the feeling you're trying to design.
Exactly. But for most music that wants to make you move, you want the floor to be the floor.
So we've covered the grid, the physics, the psychology. Now let's get into what the source calls the advanced geometry. This part of the material made my brain hurt a little bit, but in a really good way. It talks about polyrhythms and phase shifting.
This is where we start to intentionally break the grid that we worked so hard to establish in the first place.
So 3 against 4. We touched on this with accents, but this is actual structural conflict, right? Not just an illusion.
Yes, this is the real deal. Imagine you have your standard 16-step grid, which is a 4-beat cycle. Now imagine overlaying a pattern on top of it that repeats every 12 steps.
Okay, so a 3-beat cycle?
A 3-beat cycle, exactly. 12 doesn't fit evenly into 16. So the first time they play, their starting points might line up. But the second time the 12-step pattern restarts, it's still in the middle of the 16-step grid. The 16-step pattern hasn't finished its cycle yet.
So it drifts. The relationship between the two patterns is constantly changing.
It drifts. The pattern creates a rhythm that is constantly evolving relative to the downbeat. It is mathematically consistent, it's just math, but to the ear, it feels like a living, breathing organism. It never settles.
It's like watching two planets orbit at different speeds. Occasionally they align, but most of the time they are dancing around each other in complex ways.
That's a perfect description. It creates this beautiful hypnotic tension and release over a much longer cycle than just one bar.
And phase shifting, is that a similar idea?
Similar concept, but a different execution. This was pioneered by minimalist composers like Steve Reich. You take two identical loops, exactly the same pattern, and you play them at the same time.
Okay, so at first it just sounds louder.
Initially, yes. But then you start one of the loops just one step later than the other. Or you have one play just a fraction of a beat per minute slower, so it slowly drifts out of sync.
So they're constantly overlapping in new ways.
And here is the magic, the really mind-bending part. The interference between those two loops creates entirely new rhythms, phantom rhythms. You start to hear beats and melodies that aren't actually programmed in either of the individual loops.
So they're created in your brain.
They are perceived by the brain. You hear these new patterns that result from the combination of the two sound waves hitting your ear at slightly different times. You are designing sounds that don't physically exist in the source material.
You're hacking the brain's pattern recognition software. The brain is trying to make sense of the chaos, so it constructs a new, simpler rhythm to bridge the gap. That is incredible.
And this all leads to the source's final point on this topic, about tempo.
Which is?
Tempo is a number, but speed is a design.
That is deep. Unpack that for me.
We think of 120 BPM beats per minute as a fixed speed, but the source argues that 120 BPM can feel incredibly slow if there is lots of empty space and long, sustained sounds.
Right. If the drums are huge and spacious, with lots of reverb, it feels like a slow, epic stomp.
But that exact same 120 BPM can feel incredibly fast and frantic if you fill it with 16th note hi-hats and short, sharp, percussive sounds and emphasize all the offbeats.
So speed is a perception. It's a feeling. It's not just a setting on the metronome.
It's a design choice. You can make the listener feel like they're sprinting or slowly walking through a cathedral without ever changing the actual clock speed of the track.
I love that. It's like relativity for music. Okay, I want to pivot now to something the source calls the tool shapes the mind. This is the philosophy of the interface.
Ah, yes. The medium is the message, as Marshall McLuhan would say.
Exactly. The source argues that the specific software or hardware you use fundamentally changes how you think about time, and it breaks it down into three core mindsets: the MPC, the TR, and the piano roll.
Let's start with the MPC mindset. The MPC is that classic square box with the 16 rubber pads that you hit with your fingers. Think old school hip-hop. Jay Dilla, Pete Rock.
Right. It's a physical act.
The philosophy here is body and groove connection. The input method is hitting something. You are performing. You are drumming with your fingertips.
So you're capturing a human performance.
Yes. The process is play it first, capture the human error, the swing, the vibe, and then maybe you go in and clean it up or quantize it later. The feel is the origin point.
The result is a physical time feel. It's sweaty, it's imperfect from the start, it relies on your own internal clock.
Precisely. Now contrast that with the TR mindset. This is the Roland drum machines, the 808s, the 909s, the foundation of house and techno.
The step sequencer.
Right. Here, the input is 16 little buttons in a row. You don't play it in the same way. You program it. You turn on light number 1, light number 5, light number 9.
It's very visual. It looks like a checklist or a switchboard.
The philosophy is structure and logic. You see the gaps, the empty spaces, as clearly as you see the notes. You are filling in a form. The result is structural, architectural beats. You are building a perfect machine that runs itself.
And the third one, the piano roll. This is what most modern producers see on their laptop screens in software like Ableton or Logic or FL Studio.
This, the source calls abstraction and control. You are drawing lines on a grid on a screen. Time is the x-axis, pitch is the y-axis.
It looks like a spreadsheet almost, or an old player piano scroll.
It does. And the philosophy here is both dangerous and incredibly powerful. You can drag a note to be any length you want. You can zoom into the micro-millisecond and place a note with surgical precision.
So it's completely divorced from physical performance.
Entirely. The result is a purely designed intention. You can create rhythms and melodies that are physically impossible for a human to play.
So the source asks us to imagine making the exact same beat on all three of these interfaces.
Yeah. Yes. And the outcome, Or rather, the feeling of the outcome will be different every time. If you make a simple boom-bap hip-hop beat on an MPC, you start with the swing. You feel it in your fingers.
Right.
If you make that same beat on a TR machine, you start with the mathematical placement. You count it out. Kick on 1, snare on 5. If you make it on a piano roll, you start with visual alignment. You look at it, you line up the blocks.
And even if the notes end up in the exact same technical place on the grid, the soul of the rhythm is different because the path you took to get there was different.
Precisely. The tool you use shapes the mind of the architect. It changes the questions you ask and the solutions you find.
This naturally leads into genres, because entire genres of music essentially grew out of these specific design philosophies, didn't they?
It's absolutely true. Look at techno. The source defines techno as repetition plus microchange. It is designed for immersion, for that trance state we talked about.
The TR mindset.
It maintains that TR-style 16-step uniformity, but morphs the timbre. The loop stays the same, but the texture of the sound evolves over minutes and minutes.
Versus hip-hop.
Hip-hop is offbeat focus plus sample texture. The grid matters, but it matters less than the texture and the feel of the loop. It's all about that MPC swing, that drag snare we talked about earlier.
The human element.
Exactly. And then you get to IDM intelligent dance music. Artists like Aphex Twin, Autek, or Square Pusher.
This is the piano roll pushed to its absolute limit.
It's asymmetry and complexity. It's about deliberately confusing the listener's sense of where one is. It is architecture designed to be a maze, a puzzle box.
The source gives us a brief historical timeline of this evolution, and it's fascinating to see how it tracks perfectly with technology.
It really does. The 60s saw the introduction of machine time, the first drum machines that were perfectly metronomic. The 70s established repetition as a core musical idea. Think disco and Kraftwerk.
And the 80s.
The 80s was the generalization of the 16-step grid, the drum machine era. Everyone, from Prince to Madonna, started thinking in these 16-step blocks.
And then the 90s was the pushback against that perfection.
The 90s was the obsession with human feel producers, spending all their time trying to make the machines sound like people again, playing with that zurr, that deviation, the search for the perfect imperfection.
And the 2000s.
That's the era of software abstraction. The piano roll takes over. The computer becomes the central instrument.
And from the 2010s to now,
the source argues, we're in the era of rhythm as pure aesthetic design. We have all the tools. We have access to every one of those mindsets at the click of a mouse. We can be robots, it can be humans, or we can be impossible aliens. It is purely a choice of design.
That brings us to the synthesis of all this, the final takeaway.
The core idea we need to take away from this entire deep dive is this. Rhythm programming is the design of unheard time.
Unheard time. That phrase really sticks with me. It's poetic.
It is. It is about designing the silence between the notes just as much as, if not more than, the notes themselves. The space, the gap, the breath. That is where the groove lives.
And the source categorizes producers into these different archetypes based on those tools we discussed.
Right. You have the performance type, the one with the MPC soul. You have the structural type, the TR architect, and the abstract type, the piano roll surgeon.
And the takeaway isn't that one is better than the other.
Absolutely not. A master designer knows which thinking cap to wear for the project at hand. Sometimes you need to feel it, sometimes you need to calculate it, sometimes you need to see it and draw it.
So, to the listener right now, walking down the street or sitting on the train with their headphones on, what is the final provocation?
The final provocation is this. When you listen to your next song, ask yourself, are you hearing a performance, a moment in time that was captured? Or are you walking through a blueprint?
Are you hearing a drummer playing a beat? Or are you inhabiting a carefully constructed space where every millisecond of silence was architected specifically for your brain?
Rhythm is not just sound. It is the invisible structure of your reality for those 3 minutes. It is the manipulation of your psychological clock.
That is a lot to process. I think I'm going to go listen to some music and just stare at a wall for a while and think about that.
As well you should. The architecture is all around you.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you in the next timeline.
See you there.